Good afternoon, welcome back ladies, gents and Pikachus. A little impromptu video. Now I don't want to offend anyone, I want to make that clear. This is not insulting or I'm not laughing at atheists when I say this. I'm going to be talking about atheist hypocrites. But the reason I think that most atheists, certainly the ones that I have experienced this week, are hypocrites is because they want to apply a very tough standard to me, Christianity and also God, which they won't apply to themselves. So it's almost like communism. They want to put themselves up here with those little room of elites that make all the rules, but the rules don't apply to them. So that makes them hypocrites. So let's go through some of the reasons why. And I think once we have looked at these, if we're honest, we will agree they do definitely do this. So then we have to say, can atheists make their claims, their arguments against Christianity, without also being hypocrites? Which is what Christianity is there to cure. Let's get started. So the first and the most usual argument that they will bring is dead babies. God is evil because dead babies in the Bible. So there's two ways that I want to look at this. The first is, how many of you atheists support abortion? How many of you atheists have voted for a government which enforces abortion laws? Because if you have done either one of those two things, you have to say you have physically acted in a way which promotes and encourages abortions to carry on happening, and in which case you could be said to be as culpable for dead babies as God is in the Bible, because he didn't physically kill any dead babies, did he? God never actually kills any baby. God never actually kills anyone. In fact, the only thing you can find that God does is bringing dead people back to life or saving people. They're the only direct interventions that you will find in the Christian Bible that God ever does. He never kills anyone personally, not once. So if that is true, you can only say speculatively that God encourages other people to kill innocent babies, which I still would disagree with, but you can make that case. But if you're making the case that God is evil because he encourages people to act in a way which ends in dead babies, then you have to say you are evil because you vote for a government which encourages dead babies, or you support abortion which is dead babies. And let me remind you, the babies which die in the Bible are collateral damage in a war during a time when there was no medical technology in order to save them. And if they were made orphans, there was no way they were going to be picked up by the winning culture. There was just not enough resources to do that. People looked after their own children and they barely had enough resources for that. So, with that in mind, point number one, dead babies. Can we say atheists can make a fair argument against God via the dead baby theory without also condemning themselves to being evil and also hypocrites? I don't think we can, for the reasons we just went through. So no, dead babies is not a good platform for atheists to argue against Christianity unless they are willing to concede that they are also evil and hypocrites, in which case they can't then make a fair argument because they are evil hypocrites. And who's going to listen to an evil hypocrite? Certainly not me. Point number two. Pointless deaths in a war. This follows on from the dead babies thing, because a lot of atheists, they're going to bring up Exodus and they're going to bring up the many wars recorded in the Bible. So, have you, atheists, supported Gaza, Palestine, Israel, India, Pakistan? Or have you supported Ukraine, Europe or Russia? Or have you supported America or who was it in 2005? Afghanistan. If you've ever supported any of those people politically, if you've ever put out a Facebook post in favour of any one of those nations, then you support pointless deaths in a war as well. So once again, we're back to the are you an evil hypocrite theory, where you are trying to apply this standard to God so that you can condemn him as evil, but when we turn that standard around on you, you don't want any part of it. Because you know if God is evil for doing that, then also you are. And if you are evil trying to say that he's evil, then you're a hypocrite. And therefore you have no platform to make your argument against Christianity. So no, point two, pointless war deaths, you can't use that unless you're evil and hypocrite. Point number three, general support of slavery. This is an interesting one because I can tell you now, God does not support slavery in the Bible at all, ever. There is no point when God says slavery is good or that we should do it. However, plenty of times in the Bible, in the Old Testament specifically, but some in the New Testament, there are examples of cultures having slaves, trading in slaves, adopting slaves into their family, or freeing slaves. Slaves are a thing in the Bible. We know that. In the Bronze Age time, slaves were a thing. And that carried on being a thing until the end of the 18th century, where Britain went to war to end slavery in the West. And today we only have small pockets of slavery in some of the third world countries and also in China. Which brings me to my point. If you are going to condemn the Bible for containing slavery, despite the fact that God never encourages this, and God actually says, I am leading you so that you can free the captives and be free. And the entire thesis of God's commands to us is to free us within our spirit so that we can express our freedom on the world. And also, we can express it in a bad way. We can express it in violence, mindlessly, or we can be racist or something like that if we choose. But God isn't the arbiter of how we use our free will. But he just says that it's a good thing that we have it and we should try to use it in a moral way. So, if atheists, you have ever purchased anything off of Amazon or from Alibaba or Temu, you are in danger of being a hypocrite again, because most of the stuff, if not all of the stuff you find on Temu, Alibaba and Amazon that comes cheaply to you, the reason it is so cheap is because the people that make those things haven't been paid for the last few years. Or if they've been paid, it's been a tiny, tiny amount which they still needed to pay tax out of. And they still needed to pay for their family and pay their other running costs. So they are effectively slaves with digital chains. No, there isn't chains on them. They could quite happily go home and say, well, I'm not working because I'm not being paid for the last 9 months. But they would starve and they would die, and so would their parents, who they are charged with the care of in China, because there's no pension system unless you're one of the elites, which is like virtually no one. So, in conclusion of point 3, support of slavery in the Bible making God evil, the first thing to consider is God does not support slavery. He actually ends slavery. In the Bible, he says, I am charging you with ending slavery, freeing the captives. That is a quote. Freeing the captives is one of the orders he gives. And we did it. But if you want to condemn the Bible and Christians for reading the Bible, for having a case in there which involves slaves, then you are a hypocrite if you've ever bought anything from Temu, Alibaba or Amazon, which is low priced, and you thought, wow, that's a steal. I don't know how it's that cheap. Because the reason that stuff's cheap is because of modern day slavery, and the more money you pump into Temu or Alibaba or Amazon, the more you are supporting that slavery, in which case you would be evil for doing that. And I don't see you condemning Temu. While you're buying their stuff, you're supporting that, whereas God didn't support slavery and gave an express order to his people to free all the captives and to not have slaves. Now, as a proviso to that, in the Old Testament there are many times when people have slaves already, or they pick up people who are orphans and they employ them in their household as slaves. But the thing you need to remember is in every single one of those examples, the slave gets treated like a son or a daughter, gets fed, gets clothing, gets a roof over their head, gets treated equally, and after 7 years they are accepted as a full daughter or son into that person's family. Every single case ends like that. So actually slavery is kind of the wrong word to be calling it when we think of today's slaves, or for instance slaves from the 12th century. That's really what you're trying to relate. You're saying 12th century slavery that we knew about and learnt about in school is slavery, and that's what you're blaming on God, even though in the Bible that never happens, certainly not under God's command. And then we have to consider that you are buying things off Temu every day and not calling that slavery when it is. That's more of a closer analogue to 12th century slavery than anything that happens in the Bible. So, in conclusion of point 3, support of slavery. Can we say God is evil because slavery is in the Bible? No. Can you make that argument without being evil and a hypocrite? No. And by the way, stop buying stuff off Temu, because it is encouraging slavery and paying for the slave masters. I knew you'd enjoy this. Point 4. God is evil because he creates creatures which will die. So he builds suffering and death into his creatures when he creates them, and by way of doing this, he is evil. Can atheists fairly make this claim? Well, I'm not going to approach the subject of whether God should have made everyone into invulnerable, everlasting mini-gods, because I think that is a ridiculous thing to expect, and I don't think that would have worked out well for humanity. Bearing in mind we have free will, and a lot of people misuse that for mindless violence, slavery, rape, all these horrible things. If that person could never be ended, then the only way to fight them, to stop them doing that, would be to raise an army more powerful than them and perpetually be at war with them to try and limit their progress. You'd never be able to kill them because you can't kill them. They can't be suffering, so you have to imprison them and you have to make sure they can't get out of that prison. That's the only way that you could solve that if death and suffering wasn't built in. So, my point is this. Free will is not morally limited. God offers us all free will, and we have free will. We can do whatever we like. The only limitation on that free will to make sure that we use it in a good way is punishment, which comes in the form of suffering, and finality, which comes in the form of death. So, for free will to be morally applied to humanity, it requires suffering and also death. And if God hadn't provided those things, then he would have set us up to be naturally evil and perpetually evil because we never die. So, can we fairly say, if we are atheists, creatures suffering and dying is an indicator that God is evil? No, we can't, because of the reasons that I just said. And as an extra bonus, if you are going to say anyone who creates a creature that is built in to suffer and die is evil, that means every single mother and father on earth is evil, and every child who wishes to have a family will be evil, because we do not have the capacity to procreate a creature which is invulnerable to suffering and damage and doesn't die via the passage of time. So that means, like the other three examples, if we change God's rules in order to not make him evil, to please the atheists, we condemn the entirety of humanity to being evil, and evil for the rest of eternity, and therefore God is evil. So either way you swing it, your way of rewriting God's rules makes us evil, and therefore God evil. But the way God has done it means some people are using their free will to be evil, and we can complain about them as much as we want, but not everybody, because most people choose to live a moral, righteous life. Even if they don't get it right, they're aiming in that direction. And the only reason that is promoted and prioritized over the evil lifestyle is because of suffering and death being a limiting factor, rather than God saying, here's free will, but you're not allowed to be violent, which is presumably what atheists think a good God would have done. So, conclusion on point 4. Making creatures which die and suffer, is this making God evil? Absolutely not. The opposite is true. So we get to the last point, point number 5. God is evil because he puts free will into humans, and then they use it to be evil and suffer and die and kill and rape and murder and thief. This is the argument that atheists often use. Can we say, if we're an atheist, that God is evil because he grants us all free will without limitations? No, because of point 4. Although we are morally encouraged to use our free will and we have freedom to use it in any way we like, it is not delimited, because if we mess around, we will find out. And what I mean by that is people who are evil and use their free will in an evil way, they may get away with it for a year. Who knows, they may get away with it for 10 years, or 3 decades, or a lifetime. But eventually, the passage of time is going to catch up with them, and they will die. And when they die, they are going to be judged on those behaviours. Plus, during your life, if you piss off people too severely, you will be judged by other humans, and that will come in the form of suffering and physical violence, punishments they're going to levy against you. And if it's too severe, it may well cause your death. So we know suffering, violence, punishments and judgments in the form of death is something we can use our free will to create, but it's only going to be okay in the minds of other humans if it's well deserved, which means free will granted by God is not limited by God in any way. We can do everything that we want to do. We can do anything we like. But through the fact that we may well be punished and suffer and even die through the hands of other humans for misusing our free will, it is physically limited by the passage of time and by vengeful fists from other men. So can we say putting free will in humanity makes God evil? No. And in fact, if God limited our free will so that it wasn't free anymore, rather than limiting our physicality with the passage of time, that would make God evil, because we would immediately be born into slavery of God's morality, which may well turn out great. I think that would turn out great because I choose that anyway. But the fact is, those who do not choose it would bemoan it because they'd be slaves to it, and there would be no chance for them to ever get out of it because they will not ever die, and they can't suffer apart from internally, morally. That would be evil. So, in conclusion, dead babies, pointless deaths in war, support of slavery, which, by the way, isn't a thing, creatures dying and suffering, and putting free will into humanity, are these things which mark out God as an evil being? Absolutely not, for the reasons that I've gone through. And in fact, I think now that we've broken it down logically, we can see these things make God good. These are indicators that God is a thoughtful, logical being who creates creatures that he loves enough to give freedom to, and regretfully will punish with judgments if they are immoral. And he even gives us puny humans the ability to punish one another if we get too big for our boots and we start thinking that evil is okay. So in that way, you have to actually accept that even if you don't believe in God, the description of God's morality is good. And if you judge yourself by the same bar that you are setting for God to pass in order to not be evil, you would be evil. So isn't it just a good job that that isn't the bar that we have to pass? Otherwise the entire world would be condemned to eternal evil, and we'd never even be able to die to solve it. And in that way we know that God is good. So, that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed that and you learned something. God bless you all, and I'll see you lovely people in the next one. Bye now. The thing you have to remember, atheists, is I was once like you. I was an atheist for 20 years, a very successful one, so I understand where you're coming from, but you don't understand my position, and until you do, you'll get nowhere. So that's the end of this video. God bless you all, have a lovely evening, and I'll see you next time. Bye!